Welcome to Hello Therapy, a podcast to help you take charge of your mental health through evidence-based psychological tips and tools straight from the therapy room so that you can live life better. Are you navigating the turbulent waters of perimenopause and seeking practical strategies for better mental and physical health? Well, look no further because today we are opening up the conversation around perimenopause, which is very timely as September is Perimenopause Awareness Month. I am joined by Dr. Ella Woods, clinical psychologist, expert in perimenopause, and creator of the Perimenopause Balance Plan. Ella is certified in nutrition and lifestyle medicine by the Integrative Women's Health Institute and is also the founder of the Child Psychology Hub, a private child and family clinical psychology clinic in Derby. In this conversation, we take an in-depth look at the many emotional and physical challenges of perimenopause, and Ella provides practical insights and tips to help navigate them. Through this episode, you'll hear snippets of our own experience of perimenopause, which I really hope will demystify this often misunderstood phase of life. So stay tuned to discover small, impactful changes that can transform your well-being and empower you as you move through your own perimenopause journey. So let's dive in. So thank you, Ella, for joining me on the Hello Therapy podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited about our chat today because perimenopause is a subject that's really close to my heart because I am experiencing perimenopause and have done for maybe 2 to 3 years now. I am increasingly seeing women who are experiencing perimenopause, so I thought it'd be great to have a chat about the intersection between mental health and perimenopause. So before we start, do you want to tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Ella Woods. I'm a clinical psychologist and I specialise in perimenopause and also child and family clinical psychology. So my two sort of things that I work
Okay.
on.
Right. So I came across you on Instagram and you got some really great content on there. And one of your pinned posts is a carousel post about all of the different symptoms of perimenopause. And I think I counted them, there's about 11 pages on this carousel post, which gives you a sense of how many perimenopause symptoms that can be experienced by women. Can you break it down for us and tell us exactly what is perimenopause and what sorts of symptoms do women typically experience?
Yeah, so I think sometimes it's it's a bit easier to start with the term menopause, which
Okay.
lots of women will know about. They'll understand that term and they will have heard that term. And menopause is when you've not had your menstrual period for 12 months. And anything after that day, so that one day of your life, is postmenopause. And perimenopause is the time leading up to that transition. So for some women, it can last as little as 2 years. And for some women, it can last 10 years or more. So that transition period leading up to full menopause can be quite a significant amount of time for lots of women.
Mm.
And menopause is when your ovaries are shutting up shop. So they have finished producing eggs, so you've finished ovulating. And when we think about perimenopause, it's because it's that transition leading up to that time, it's when we're running out of our egg reserve. And also, the eggs that we have in our ovaries may be reducing in quality as well. So, the combination of those two things can cause a lot of fluctuations and obviously decreases in our sex hormones. And it's those fluctuations and decreases that can really start to sort of impact and produce the symptoms that we see during perimenopause. For lots of women, one of the first symptoms that they experience is a change in their periods.
Mhm.
So that is just a change to what is normal to you. So it may be that they're becoming heavier or lighter, shorter or longer. And also, you're very likely to start experiencing some sort of mood symptoms during perimenopause. So whether that's sort of mental health symptoms, so anxiety or depression, or just not feeling yourself. or irritability. There's lots of a long, long list of different sort of mood
Mhm.
symptoms that you might start experiencing during that period.
Mhm. And let's think about the physical symptoms then. Do you know what the sort of the most common, apart from the changes in your menstrual cycle, like what are the other physical symptoms that women might experience?
Yeah, so there's things like heart palpitations, which is quite a
Mm.
common one, night sweats,
Yeah.
hot flashes. I mean, quite often hot flashes for women quite often comes a lot later in the transition, so as they get closer to sort of full menopause. But night sweats, so waking up very sweaty and very hot in the
Mm.
night is a really common one. Lots of unusual symptoms such as increasing allergies, maybe
Right.
also gut symptoms. So, like bloating and sort of IBS symptoms are quite common as
Mm.
a physical symptom of perimenopause. So, yeah,
Mhm.
there's a whole host of things that can start happening to our bodies
Mm.
when those hormones start fluctuating.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I was surprised by is that sort of seemingly unrelated physical symptoms. Like for me, I'd get these sort of zaps of pain in my fingers and body
Yep.
aches that where I was sort of almost constantly feeling like I was coming down with the flu. And then I would suddenly the next day feel okay. And I think the thing is that in that sort of beginning stage where you haven't seen any medical practitioners, you don't really know what it is. You just sort of assume it's, the stress of life. Like for me, it was sort of around COVID time that all of this started happening for me. So I was just thinking it's just a really stressful period in my life.
Yeah.
So a lot of women don't really realize that, and they can go many months, sometimes years, not knowing that what they're experiencing is perimenopause.
Yeah, yeah, it can be really challenging. And I think it's only recently that we've started talking about perimenopause as a thing that is named. Obviously, it's been
Mhm.
happening all the time. But like I say, most people are more familiar with the term menopause and this
Yeah.
idea of, ovaries shutting up shop. And we haven't really talked about perimenopause as much
Mm.
as, yeah, hopefully we are doing now. And I'm definitely advocating for a lot more conversations around this phase of life for women so they can
Yeah.
feel more prepared, that these things don't creep up at them and they don't feel completely overwhelmed with all the physical and mental health and cognitive symptoms that can occur for them during this time.
Yeah, and I think part of the issue is education, isn't it? Because I remember at school, obviously learning about the menstrual cycle, and I think they may have mentioned menopause, but perimenopause, it wasn't even a thing back in the day when I was at school. So you kind of had an awareness of that your periods stop, but like what you said earlier about 10 years of someone's life, you can be experiencing these symptoms. That's a really long time, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it can be longer for some women. So I think,
Mm.
I've had a lot of interactions on my Instagram account recently from women in their 30s who can be quite upset about me sort of making posts about sort of menopause, perimenopause, that they may be seeing on their sort of feed. But
Mhm.
actually, I wish I knew a lot more in my early to mid 30s before sort of coming into the perimenopause transition, because there's
Yeah.
lots of things that you can do to really sort of head off some of those sort of impacts of perimenopause and be prepared
Mm.
for the symptoms that may be coming.
Mhm. Well, I'm going to ask you about that later, but for now, can we think about the mental health side of things? The mental health impact of perimenopause can be huge, can't it? So can you give us a sense of what that might look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think you're right. It can be absolutely massive. When I'm talking to women about this, I like to sort of break it down and get them to think about the two separate layers that can happen in terms of the impact on mental health. So we have sort of the physiological or the biological impact of what's happening to our bodies. So you think about the declining hormones that are happening during perimenopause and the fluctuations in hormones that we're experiencing. That has a direct impact on our brain. So our brain is absolutely covered in receptors for estrogen in particular. So just losing estrogen on its own has an impact on our brain. But these hormones also have a massive impact on our neurotransmitters in our brain. And the way I like to think about neurotransmitters is if you think about your brain as a city and there's lots of tiny little cars all running around the city, which are called neurotransmitters. And these cars are delivering messages across the city to different parts of the city. When those cars are running smoothly and on time, everybody in the city is happy and regulated, and things are just running as they should do. As soon as something starts happening to those little cars, so they start maybe running a bit slower, or they're not, on time, or they start breaking down, everybody in the city starts to feel stressed and worried. And yeah, things just aren't then running as they should be. So when our hormones impact on these neurotransmitters in our brain, that on its own can affect how we feel. So if you
Mm.
take away any other stresses in your life or situations that are happening to you, just the physiological impact of these declining and fluctuating hormones can change how you feel. So they
Mm.
can make you more susceptible to stress, make you feel less motivated, less happy, lots of different things that can happen. So that's the first layer. And when women
Mhm.
start to understand that actually a lot of these changes are happening sort of really outside of their control to many, to lots of the extent that it is, that can release a lot of sort of shame and guilt and burden about
Mm.
how they're feeling. The second layer is, I guess, about our complicated human brain. So, how we think about things, how we feel about things, our past traumas and experiences, and how they impact on our thinking patterns, and the way we feel about things and our relationships. And that, those are the things that I guess we target in traditional therapy. So we target people's thinking and behaviors and sort of thinking about, how we support people with some of those patterns. That is the double layer of how those two things
Mm.
can impact on perimenopause. So the physiological changes that are happening combined with our own sort of personalities and thinking patterns and ways that we see the world and understand the world.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned there, I love a good metaphor, by the way. So I love that metaphor. You mentioned sort of things like anxiety, depression, low mood. What other experiences might people have around their mental health?
In perimenopause, it's really common to sort of have a lot of irritability. There's one that I've got on my Instagram account called peri-rage. And that, I mean, that's a term that I've made up myself. It's not a sort of
Hmm.
scientific term. But when we think about those neurotransmitters, there's one in particular called GABA, which when estrogen starts to reduce, this neurotransmitter called GABA becomes less effective.
Okay.
And GABA really helps us regulate our brain. It really helps us calm down, and it really helps us sort of inhibit ourselves. So if we're feeling a lot of stress, GABA can help us, sort of regulate and calm ourselves without just reacting to stress. So
Okay.
if that neurotransmitter is no longer as sort of effective as it has been in the past, we're more likely to react to stress more quickly, more severely. We're more likely to act on feelings of stress. And that really relates to that peri-rage sort of concept that I was trying to
Yeah.
get across to people, which is you may find yourself reacting to stress in a very out of character way. And that was one of my sort of major symptoms that took me to the
Mm.
GP to sort of gain some support. It was just very out of character sort of reactions to things that I hadn't reacted to before.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't have the understanding of what's happening in your brain during this period, that can bring up so many sort of experiences and sort of worries around stress and guilt and shame and embarrassment, about the way that you might be behaving in relationships,
Yeah.
parenting.
Yeah.
It can be really, that's when you start to get those feelings of, am I going crazy and I can't control
Yeah.
myself, and all these sort of narratives that come up for women
Yeah.
during this time.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that, and I know that the clients that I've worked with over the years, that people sort of say that I can feel okay in 1 minute, and then literally the next minute I'm flying off the handle at something, or I'm so angry at something so small
Yeah.
that I feel like I'm losing control, and as you say, really out of character. And when you are trying to parent, and maybe you've got young children actually at this point,
Yeah.
where, it's difficult parenting children, young children anyway, that's so challenging,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the parenting aspect for me has been really significant. So I've got two really young daughters, so they're 5 and 3, So I've been going through this sort of early perimenopausal stage with some really, really young children. And anyone who's had children will know the additional stress and noise that comes with parenting
Mm.
young children. And that's another thing that can happen to lots of women. They can become a lot more sensitive to like sensory input. So noise, smells, can all of a
Yeah.
sudden become quite overwhelming. And again, that's due to the impact of, on the brain in terms of all these
Mm.
different hormone declines that are happening.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for me, I just felt like I didn't feel like myself anymore, and there was a real sense of who I am, my identity is shifting, and that felt really, really difficult, actually. I think it's also difficult to know when to go to the doctor, isn't it? I think that's the challenge that I had. And I think people can just go on and on and on and feeling like that and just sort of, you know, putting it down to various other things, only to be told when they get to the GP, it's not your hormones, you're too young, the bloods are normal if they've had blood tests. Have you heard those kind of stories from women that you work with?
Yeah, unfortunately, over and over and over again.
Wow.
I think things are starting to change. So I think the push to get education out there regarding menopause and perimenopause is increasing. I think obviously social media presence of certain people, some of the big
Mm.
gurus in the space, are taking up rightly a lot of space and having a lot of sort of strong messages that they want to get across. But as we know, it takes a long time for some of this, so new research and for new ideas to catch up and actually be integrated into, yeah, our healthcare system, and for allowing those changes to, yeah, to integrate into our healthcare system.
Yeah.
So I think GPs have a very difficult job. I think they have to
Mm.
be masters of lots of different conditions and lots of different presentations, and it's super challenging. However, 50% of the people that they see will eventually go through this transition. So it
Yeah.
feels like it's a really important topic that really needs a lot more attention. I mean, I know within my clinical psychology training, we had a very brief lecture on menopause that was super, super short. It was mentioned, but we didn't understand about perimenopause, and we didn't really go
Yeah.
into any depth about how menopause can impact on mental health. So we've still
Yeah.
got a long way to go. And we're fighting a lot of
Mm.
patriarchy in terms of medical research, including women in research, you know, understanding women's bodies.
Yeah.
We are only really just starting to sort of research that properly and include women in the studies that they need to be included in.
Mm. You mentioned earlier that there are lots of things that a woman or women can do to sort of help them in their journey in perimenopause. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I teach a lot of different things within the program that I offer women. However, if I
Mm.
try and pick out sort of some of the three main pillars of things that women can, yeah, do on their own, I guess. So really start to
Yeah.
think about and put into practice in their sort of daily lives. So the first one is sleep and stress. And I think that we hear this all the time, isn't there? There's a narrative constantly about you need to get better sleep and you need to manage your stress.
Yeah.
They are massive hormone disruptors. So, if you have stress levels that are out of control, or you struggle to manage stress, or you are struggling to regulate yourself in really stressful situations, and if you're also struggling to get good quality sleep that allows your brain to sort of restore and clean itself, which is what your brain is doing when it's in deep sleep,
Mhm.
then they are both going to have big impacts on your hormones. So, finding some practices that help with your stress levels, ensuring that you are consciously thinking about how you're managing stress and how you are sort of allowing yourself to have, yeah, some downtime and ways of managing that. And for lots of women, in terms of sleep, their sleep doesn't improve sometimes until they start some sort of hormone therapy. However, there's lots of sleep hygiene tips that can help, such as the
Mhm.
exposure to blue light in the evening, wearing blue blocking glasses, restricting, yeah, screens before bedtime.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's lots of sleep hygiene things that can really help, and that was a big impact for me. I wear an Aura ring, which has really helped me manage and
Mm.
understand both my stress and my sleep a lot better.
Mhm.
So there's different tools out there that can help you monitor and sort of understand, how to manage your sleep and stress better. The second one is diet, and I think when people hear the word diet, it can sometimes be quite triggering. But what we're talking about in perimenopause is a nutrient dense diet. So I am by no means perfect at all, but I have done a concerted effort of cutting out processed and ultra processed food from my diet.
Mhm.
And it's very difficult when you're standing in the supermarket. On any aisle of the supermarket, you will be surrounded by processed foods. And I'm also a busy mum,
Yeah.
and finding time to cook and prepare meals, it's really, really challenging. But there is ways of doing it. And one of the big parts of having a nutrient dense diet is just thinking about your protein intake. I think
Okay.
we all undereat protein pretty much, unless we've sort of been through a program that sort of tells us otherwise. Protein is just so important for so many parts of our sort of health. So, yes,
Mhm.
for our muscle building and our bone health, but also for our brain health, our immunity, for making sure that we're feeling fuller for longer and we're not needing to snack for balancing our blood sugar.
Mhm.
And I really, really try and encourage. So I'm not a nutritionist. However, eating somewhere around 100 grams of protein a day as a minimum is a really helpful starting point for women who are just
Mhm.
starting on their journey and wanting to think a little bit about their nutrition.
What does that look like in a day? 100 grams?
So, if you imagine a palm size piece of protein, so a large
Okay.
palm, so a piece of chicken breast,
Mhm.
that's probably between 25 and 30 grams of protein.
Okay.
So you need to start your day with protein. And I think lots of women miss out on protein at breakfast time.
Mm.
Um,
If they eat breakfast at all?
yeah, I would really be encouraging anybody suffering with perimenopause symptoms to consider
Mm.
adding in a protein rich breakfast for the start of their day.
Mhm.
For me, because very busy running out the door with children, that for me that often looks like a um, nutrient dense smoothie. So that
Okay.
includes protein powder for me. That includes frozen cauliflower. Don't knock it until you try it. Maybe a little bit of fruit, some flax seeds or some
Yeah.
spinach, some almond milk. Can really sort of dense out your smoothies in a way that can really help you start the day with that
Mm.
protein sort of hit that you need in the mornings.
Mhm.
And the third one is movement, in particular, resistance training.
Mm.
So I have been somebody that has been on and off at the gym throughout my life. And I've always attended classes, which have also normally been cardio based classes.
Yeah.
And if they still feel good for you and your body's still enjoying those, then absolutely carry on doing some cardio. However, we really need to be adding resistance training into our routine. And for me, that looks like some weightlifting in the gym, using the
Mm.
weights in the gym. I didn't know what I was doing. I was scared. But once I started, I really felt the benefits of increasing sort of my muscle, doing that resistance training, the impact it has on our mental health.
Mhm.
And I would just really encourage that you need to find a routine that works for you. It's not the same for everybody. But we know that our muscle mass and our bone density declines in midlife if we don't do
Mhm.
anything about it. So the combination of the protein and the resistance training can really help sort of counteract those sort of impacts that we have of the decreasing sort of bone density
Mhm.
and the decreasing muscle mass in midlife. Yeah, so they're my three top ones. So diet, including protein, sleep and stress management, and some sort of resistance training.
Mhm. Well, can I play devil's advocate here a
Yeah.
little bit? Because everything that you're saying makes complete sense. But if I know anything about myself and also the clients that I've worked with over the years, who, again, like really busy mums, they're working, they're juggling the house, they're juggling the life admin, they're rushing around place to place. They're going to bed late because that's the only time that they get
Yep.
when everyone else is in
Anytime.
bed. Yeah. So, but therefore they're tired, and the way that they feel, they're low in mood, their mood is sort of shifting. There's the peri-rage in the background as well. Like it can be super difficult to even muster up the energy to go for a walk, let alone pick up a weight or drive to the gym.
Yep.
Do you have any pointers for someone listening to this that's kind of in that headspace and doesn't feel like they or feels like they need the motivation to make those changes? So what might you say to that person?
So, yeah, I mean, the old cliche, we're always looking for progress over perfection. So, the way that I teach this to women that come into my program, but yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's mine or somebody else's, is that it
Hmm.
is about incremental changes. So, you have to find a starting point. And I think for many women, when the pain gets too much, so when the symptoms get too difficult to deal with, or they start to feel so concerned about their health, sometimes that can be a catalyst for change.
Yeah.
And, I think quite often women don't yet have the education around the impact that perimenopause and hormone decline can have on our wider health.
Mm.
So we know that estrogen is anti-inflammatory, and that when we start to lose it, we are more susceptible or more at risk of inflammatory conditions to do with our heart, to do with our bones, to do with our brains. So, if you think about dementia as an
Mm.
inflammatory sort of process, so it may be that actually having some of that education about wanting to, yeah, so it might be helpful if I just share mine. So my motivation is my children, having young
Mm.
children and wanting to be as healthy as I can be for them for, the next however many years that I'm their
Yeah.
carer, their parent. That has been my main motivator to pushing myself to start making some of these incremental changes.
Hmm.
And I think if you're really struggling, it's about finding somebody to work with, and whether that's a personal trainer, whether that's, going for a walk with a friend and setting like an accountability partner to sort of allow at least 2 walks a week. And just finding those little shifts that you can start to make that then hopefully lead to a bit of a cascade of things that happen. Because I couldn't do cardio at the gym. I was too exhausted. I was too
Yeah.
fatigued. The thought of going to do a class just made me feel sick. However, going to the gym and just doing 15 minutes of weightlifting was a
Mm.
lot more manageable. Like I could get myself to that point, I'm just
Yeah.
going to go for 15, 20 minutes and do this. And the benefits that then rolled on from making that just first initial change were then supportive of more motivation and more sort of
Yeah.
willingness to go and do things.
Mhm.
Can I just add the protein rich breakfast in as a starting point rather than worrying about the whole rest of my day? So it's these
Yeah.
small incremental changes that we can make that then will help us feel more balanced, will help us have a little bit more energy, which then may help us, take the other steps. But if you're really, really struggling, it is about just finding somebody to support you with that. There's lots of different things out there now that you can access, different programs, different individuals that can help you sort of move through some of those stages.
In terms of the peri-rage situation, so the anger that someone can feel, do you have any tips on how to manage that, especially when you're sort of also feeling very up and down in your mood? What sort of advice might you give someone?
Yeah. So, as we talked about those two different layers of how this impacts on us, and the physiological side, and how that, we don't necessarily have a huge amount of control over that. I think what then happens in terms of the second stage is that women can get very self-critical and very, yeah, talking to themselves in a really self-critical way following incidents such as sort of anything that relates to sort of peri-rage.
Mm.
So I work really hard to try and support women to develop that sort of kinder, compassionate self voice. And that can be a real game changer for some women. I think some women don't realize that they've actually been talking to themselves in this way for their whole
Yeah.
life. And it's just become a normal sort of way of sort of thinking and talking about yourself in your own head.
Yeah.
And when you start to shift that, and when you start to bring in that more sort of compassionate or kind voice, it can actually also give you a little bit longer in those moments to help regulate yourself a little bit more, or maybe snap yourself out of those moments a little bit quicker. But I think overall, women just need to understand that there is these two layers and actually release some of the burden, and talk to partners, talk to children, if they're old enough to understand, like think about developmentally, what they can understand. I've even
Yeah.
spoken to my sort of 5-year-old about, some of the things that are happening to mummy, that hormones are changing and that sometimes can make me, feel a little bit off at times. So it's about sort of gathering support around you, letting people
Mm.
understand what's going on, so that they can support you as well. And we
Mhm.
know that when we've got sort of supportive communities around us during this time, that can really support our mental health and allow us to feel, better anyway.
Yeah, I talk a lot about building in the pause, trying to slow things down, trying to kind of catch that moment. You know, that moment just before you say something or yell something or whatever it is, trying to just slow down long enough for you to build in that compassionate voice and say, okay, this is a really difficult moment right now.
Yeah.
You know, what do I need? I need to take myself off or go out in the garden for a breath of fresh air or whatever it is to help in those moments where, you know, that threat response is really, really activated and switched on. But you're still, you know, you're still gonna have times when you don't catch it and, you know, you are experiencing a sort of full on rage moment.
Yeah. And I think the other things I said, I mean, especially around the sleep and stress as well. Like,
Mm.
obviously, if you're tired and you haven't had enough sleep and you've got a lot of sort of stressful things happening to you, or you struggle, you don't necessarily have any regulating practices built in regularly. Because I think people sort of think about, okay, I can take a deep breath or deep breathing. But if that's not something you're doing regularly, then it's really difficult. But if you're doing things like mindful breathing or mindfulness or deep breathing on a regular basis, that is also going to help you in those pause moments to, yeah, have a little bit more time to kick in that thinking brain,
Mhm.
to try and manage those situations. But, I suppose just want to share, although I have all these tools and all these resources, I also still really struggle with this at times. So I
Yeah.
can still find myself sort of moving into a stress response really quickly. And I think it's just about, women knowing they're not alone with this sort of reaction
Yeah.
and these feelings. And that it is okay to talk about it. It is okay to seek support. And it's okay to let other people know around you so they can support you as well.
I agree. It's so important. Although sometimes people don't have partners or people around them that do understand, or maybe can understand. And that's when it's really challenging, isn't it? If there isn't that scaffolding around someone.
Yeah, it can be really, really challenging. But I would say that there is places to seek support. So there's lots of communities of other women, either online. There's quite often a lot of groups locally, that
Mhm.
may be places that women, sort of midlife women, can meet together and start to discuss
Yeah.
these things. We know from the research that when under stress, women will prefer to affiliate with other women, not to do with menopause, just across the board. So, seeking out that sort of other female sort of solidarity and connection that may not be within your household. So, it may not be sort of there within your household, but that there is out there, within other environments is a really important thing, especially if you don't have that understanding in the household.
Can I ask the general course of perimenopause and menopause? Like, does it get worse before it gets better? Or no, that's a really broad question. But as you enter into sort of full menopause, do the symptoms change or fingers
Yeah,
crossed
so
get better?
yeah. I don't know if you've spoken to any women that have gone through sort of the full menopause transition. Many of them talk about symptoms settling down after
Okay.
menopause. So it does seem to be that this sort of initial stage when we're having lots of fluctuations in the perimenopause stage can be the worst for symptoms. There's about a quarter of women that don't really have symptoms that cause them any distress or discomfort at
Okay.
all. The rest of us, including a higher, people in that higher
Mm.
category that have really severe symptoms, the rest of us do have some symptoms that disrupt our life in some way.
Yeah.
However, after the menopause transition, things definitely for most women, not for everybody, but for most women can settle down quite significantly. But it's important. So even if you're somebody who's not having significant symptoms, or you're through the menopause transition and things have settled down on the other side, that it's important to understand still about the protective role of estrogen on
Okay.
our wider health. So just because you aren't having symptoms in perimenopause doesn't mean that the decline in estrogen isn't going to impact on other sort of parts of our life. We know we're at a higher risk of osteoporosis, coronary heart disease,
Mm.
dementia, which, we still need some more research, but we know
Yeah.
that actually the decline in hormones have a link to some of those conditions.
So there is hope, though, in terms of it's a process, isn't it? And eventually it will sort of end, and you will. I know that people talk about menopause as their second spring. I've heard
Yeah,
that term
I love
before.
that one. I love it.
Yeah, so I'm just sort of holding out for that on a personal level. Um, so what would be some takeaways then if, the people, women listening or men listening who have partners who are going through this, what do you want people to know, the main points about perimenopause?
I want you to know that you're not alone, first of all, because I think at times it can feel, especially if you're really struggling with mood symptoms, it can feel like a really isolating time for people. And I also want people to know that there is reasons why they are feeling and potentially behaving in certain ways.
Mm.
And with that understanding, with that knowledge, I really hope comes a little bit more, yeah, just sort of ability to cope and to understand themselves a bit better. Perimenopause is a transition, it's a transitional stage. As you just said, it's not going to last forever, but it is a time to really hone us in and get us to think about our broader health as we move into old age, so midlife into old age. And our body quite often gives us symptoms to get us to listen to it.
Yeah.
So, some symptoms, especially, for example, like gut symptoms, might be a sign that we need to sort of take notice or take care a little bit more. My perimenopause journey, which is still ongoing, has been an absolute revolution in terms of me focusing and thinking about my health in a completely different way than I ever have done before. And I want to take that as a gift. It's hard and I'm not at the end of it yet and I'm still managing and dealing with different symptoms, but the gift it's given me is understanding my health and focusing on my health a lot better, and with a lot more drive and motivation to, yeah, live a long and happy life alongside my children. So yeah, I just want women to know, yes, it's a transition, but that there's lots of things that you can do to sort of really try and, yeah, come out the other end as healthy and as happy as, we all deserve to
Mm.
be.
I really like that perspective that you have, and I'm hoping that I can get there at some point because I think it is a challenge. But I think you're right. The maybe seeing it as an opportunity, right? To go, okay, this is where I'm at. What's my body doing? What's my mental health like? And what are the changes that I need to put in place? And also to say, obviously, we haven't sort of talked about it explicitly, but obviously we mentioned, going to GP and how difficult diagnosis can be and getting treatment can be, but you can do it, and it is
Yeah.
possible, and there is help out there and support.
And yeah, I think just being able to access a GP that's understanding and who is willing to have that conversation with you. So I have a free guide on my Instagram account, which supports women to how to structure their GP appointments when they're wanting to discuss perimenopause and HRT. So it's
Amazing.
not a guide about HRT, like the medical side. It's about how to communicate with your doctor. It's got prompts and things that they can use to structure that appointment, because the power imbalance and the short appointment times can all be up
Yeah.
against you when you're trying to have these sort of quite complex conversations. So yeah, I just wanted that guide to really sort of support women and help them when they go to those appointments.
Mm.
Just a final thing. So I am on HRT, and it has been a tool. For lots of women, it's life changing. But I would say for the majority of people that I speak to, it's another incremental change in, a whole host of things that they're working on. So it may provide some relief to certain symptoms and it may help in certain ways, but it's not always the silver bullet that people are hoping for.
Mm.
And it can take a lot of time to get dosing right. And dosing has to change a lot throughout the
Yeah.
transition because things change so much during perimenopause. But I really advocate for women having access to the information they need to make those health decisions themselves. And I think this generation of women, unfortunately, are going to have to do a lot of their own research and be good at advocating for themselves. And eventually that will change. Hopefully,
Yeah.
women of the future won't have to have such a battle. But yeah, that's my final bit.
Mm. Well, as you say, the women that are the parents going through perimenopause are going to be teaching their children, like you are. This is a situation, and this is a very natural process that women go through. And yeah, hopefully it will filter down, and there'll be much more open conversations, more education, more support by the time our children are at this stage of life.
Yeah, I hope so too.
But your guide sounds amazing, and I'll put that link. I'll put the link for that in the show notes so that people can have a look. Thank you so much, Ella, for coming on. It's been such a great, really informative conversation. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hello Therapy. If you found it helpful, don't forget to subscribe, follow, and review. You can get more well-being and mental health tips by joining our email list and visiting the resources section of our website at harleyclinical.co.uk. The Hello Therapy podcast and the information provided by me, Dr. Liz White, is solely intended for information and educational purposes and does not constitute personalised advice. Please do reach out to your GP or a mental health professional if you need support. Until next time, take care of yourself.